Ugh. Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to Purple Update Live. I am your host, Joe Johnson, owner of VikingsTerritory.com and purplePTSD.com. That sigh was because my cat just knocked over part of my background. So that should give you an idea as to the quality and production value of this show. There's a few different YouTube/social media based video shows that cover the Vikings, and I wanted to do something a little bit different in that I will just be covering the Vikings news of the day, my thoughts on it, so on and so forth, some of the content that we have on VikingsTerritory.com, purplePTSD.com, purpleterritoryradio.com. Get some special guests in here, so on and so forth. So the goal is to do a live show and interact with you guys out there on the interwebs, answer any questions you might have about the team or why I am a 35-year-old man with two cats. But I wanted to start today by just shouting out our sponsor, Grey Duck Vodka. This is a bottle autographed by the owner of Grey Duck Vodka, Chad Greenway. So look at me. I'm pretty cool. Just put that next to my bottle of Zoloft. So, it's Tuesday, the 19th of November. Things are looking very, very good going into the bye week. U.S. Bank refund. I don't know. I'm bad at this kind of stuff. So I'm not going to delve too much into the comeback. I was planning on doing a show yesterday, but got sidetracked. But there's just a few things out there that pertain to the game that I wanted to touch on. If you guys are seeing me on any platform, LinkedIn, YouTube, Periscope / Twitter, or Facebook, you can chat questions. I say questions or comments. Most comments would probably be about the square footage of my face, and so we can skip that if you guys want to. But obviously that was a huge game for a multitude of reasons, mainly playoff positioning. I think the Vikings are, I know the Vikings are the 6th seed right now in the NFC. They are trailing the Packers, obviously, in the NFC North. They're a few games ahead of the 7th or 8th seed, if that existed, anyone behind them. And so despite the fact that they are the 6th seed, they are close to 93%. Don't always work out that way. There's an article that you can find on Bleacher Report right now that talks about the other, I think about 7 times that the Vikings have started 8-3 or better since the NFL switched to a 16-game schedule. A lot of those obviously didn't end well. I mean, some of those ended up in the NFC Championship. Actually, 4 of them did. 1998, 2000, 2009, and 2017. Then you have the 2015 team that lost in the wild card game thanks to a missed 27-yard field goal. Spoiler alerts. I'm sure none of you remember that, at least those of you who did the right thing and went to therapy after that. And 1997, I think 1992 as well. 97, they won a playoff game. Point being, a lot of those teams actually ended up in the NFC Championship, and that's because usually when you're 8-3, you're a higher seed than 6th. But there is a bottleneck at the top of the NFC, and I wanted to do a power ranking roundup. I will have some different things I hold up and graphics and whatnot. At some point, but you guys get the idea. For the most part, the Vikings are around the 7th, 8th, or 6th spot. ESPN, 7th. NFL.com, 7th. USA Today, 8th. SB Nation, 8th. Bleacher Report, 8th. CBS, 6th. CBS Sports, I think the difference is that they have us ahead of the Seahawks there. And that's really surprising, but I don't necessarily think that the Vikings are getting enough credit. I know that I'm relatively pessimistic. I have a mix of optimism and pessimism. I mean, I'm wearing this hat, and I have all this crap in the background. I haven't even opened those Wheaties, because I felt maybe that would be the last time I'd see a Vikings team on the cover of a Wheaties box, if they even do that anymore. I don't know. Banned from most grocery stores. So I give credit to CBS for, I guess, putting us ahead of the Seahawks, although the Seahawks the hot team right now in the NFC. They beat the 49ers in overtime. The Saints lost the week before last to the Falcons, which was on par. I would say had the Vikings lost to the Broncos, but they're divisional opponents, so that always changes things. The Packers are the Packers. Yeah, I don't know. I would. The Vikings have won 6 of 7 games. They've done it in a variety of ways. Their offense has been on fire, without arguably their best player on offense for most of those games in Adam Thielen. Now the defense is a problem, namely in the secondary, and I'm kind of mixing a lot of the topics for today together. But I saw an interesting stat when I was looking up some of the statistics for Cousins for the segment I want to get to into about what his best game with the Vikings has been, because Zimmer said that Sunday the Broncos game may have been his best game, and so I was looking at different ways to quantify that, and I came across an interesting stat, which is that the Vikings allow a 97 QBR on deep passes, which is 30th in the league. The only teams worse are the Raiders and the Bengals are terrible. That's really disconcerting because Cousins, as hot as he has been, I mean, and this is across an entire game, obviously, but the highest QBR he has had is 93.4 against the Eagles this season, a game in which he had 333 yards, 4 touchdowns, and no interceptions. And point being, it's very, very hard to get that close to 100 in QBR on ESPN's algorithm. So that just shows how poorly the secondary is playing. When you put on top of that the fact that the number 1 and the number 2 defensive ends in the league in regards to pressures are Danielle Hunter and Everson Griffin, that hasn't necessarily translated into sacks as of late. But perhaps, or not perhaps, really the reason for that is that the secondary is playing so poorly, namely in Xavier Rhodes, that the quarterback can step up in the pocket and make a quick throw because people are more often than not going to be open, especially down the field. That is just nuts to me. A 97 QBR, I thought that was wrong, and that's why I usually want to record these shows around 1:30, but I saw that and I could not believe it. So the question is, and we went into this on my podcast Morning Joe's with Joe Oberle this morning, how do you fix that? How do you fix Xavier Rhodes? I mean, the guy's only 29 years old, but he's playing like Terrence Newman might if he came off the bench or out of retirement right now. I'm hoping with the bye he can get healthy, but he's been on a downward decline really since the beginning of last season, the season after he declared himself the best corner in the NFL. I can't see him being on this team next year unless things change drastically. Unless he takes a massive pay cut and things get better, but I don't know how they will. I mean, there was all that hype before the season about he's going to be healthy, he's doing things differently, he's doing more Pilates, more yoga, drinking almond milk, I assume, lots of kombucha, passing out in his car, and it's really just disconcerting. I mean, I said on Morning Joe's today that if any position were to be this out of whack at this point in the season, this late in the season, I guess it's good that it's the secondary, because obviously that's Zimmer's position. They call him the corner whisperer. That's, he was a D-backs coach for the longest time. There's depth there. There's talent there. There's incredible talent there. They've invested a lot of money. They've invested a lot of really high-end draft picks in lieu of other positions, namely the offensive line. And so, again, I bring up Rhodes' age because you think that if he can get healthy, perhaps things can get better. I mean, he has been burned, don't get me wrong. There's copious examples of that. But a lot of the problem is that he's in position. He's just a hair off. And I think that's where you see some of the frustration that he's shown, because he feels like I don't know. I can't speak for him, but maybe his body just isn't working the way he expects it to, or maybe he feels like he's in good position. And he's just got bad luck or something. But Zimmer's made comments like he hasn't turned his head at the right time. I don't know. That makes me it makes me wary because Holton Hill, we didn't see a lot of him against the Broncos. Hughes has been up and down. For obvious reasons, he's still technically, by and large, a rookie in regards to games played. He's still coming off an ACL that usually takes a season or a year to fully heal from. Trey Waynes has been up and down as well, but I want to shout him out in regards to the game that he had against the Broncos, especially that last drive. I mean, he had some really great plays in that game. But that last drive, I think Kearse is getting a lot of the shine, but Waynes deserves some credit for that as well. When it comes to Kearse, we could use him more, I'm sure. I don't know what's going to happen after the bye week. Harrison Smith has a hamstring injury. That's why Kearse was out there at the end of the game as much as he was. Anthony Harris has a pulled groin. You can put Kearse in at the nickel spot, I guess, and move Mackenzie Alexander to Rhodes' position. People online have been calling for that for a long time. I'm really against that move. Not so much Kearse maybe filling in every once in a while at the nickel spot, but more Mackenzie Alexander moving because he played a lot. He was an outside corner in college, but it's taken him this long to get to the point where he's at playing the nickel. And as important as the nickel spot is, it would just be a net negative, I think, to do that. And he's also not the right body type, I don't think, especially for Zimmer's system. Zimmer likes guys, obviously, that are over 6 feet tall, that have length. He always talks about length. That's why it was a little surprising again not to see Holton Hill out there. And so I don't really know how to fix it outside of Rhodes figuring things out. And maybe he will. Again, he's not that old. Maybe the bye week will help him. Maybe Zimmer will drive by his house at night with his lights off and threaten him subtly, which is a move that I use. I don't know. I don't really have any answers for you. That should be the tagline. Purple Update Live. I have no answers for you. The Kearse situation, the reason I kind of sighed was is on the field, the guy has been a beast. And in the last 2 weeks, he's big play Jay, I think is what the team said they should call him from now on. He intercepted the Hail Mary at the end of the game a week ago, and obviously he was a huge part of the Broncos game. It was almost a blessing in disguise that Smith wasn't out there, just because Kearse is so big that you can put him on Noah Fant, a tight end, and he can, like he said, no one's going to out-bully me, no one's going to out-physical me. The problem with Kearse is his contract's up at the end of the year, and I can see why he'd be frustrated in that regard, but he's been slow to come on. He was a preseason darling this year especially, but he hasn't contributed on the field during the regular season outside of special teams as much as he has this year. Now, perhaps, I don't know what's going on behind the scenes with contract negotiations. I know the money is really tight. There's a lot of moving parts in the secondary next year with Trey Waynes and Mackenzie Alexander's contracts coming up. But he was venting on Twitter with some fans about his contract, and somebody asked, he basically said something like, I'm looking forward to my future is bright, thank you, praying hands. And somebody says that future include the Minnesota Vikings. He said no. Connor Wickland, who is a friend of the site, has written for us in the past, basically wrote a tweet saying, well, you're not part of the Vikings future. If you were, you would have been offered a contract extension by now. Kearse responded with 2 of these, which I think meant okay, not white nationalism. But as much as I love Connor, he does have one of those haircuts. I'm just kidding. You tie that into what happened with his DUI and the gun in his car, and and Zimmer's reaction to that being just extreme anger, and it sucks because this guy obviously is a perfect fit for Zimmer's system. He's big, he can play multiple positions. When you have less money and a lot of need on this defense, you have a guy like that can play multiple positions. He's almost invaluable. I would be really surprised outside of the off the field stuff had they not brought him back next year in some regard, unless he's looking for a ton of money as like an every down safety. Whether or not that would work, I guess, would be up to him if he wants to cash in or find a bigger role, or both. That's up to him. But yeah, it's really hard, especially with the suspension that I'm sure is looming at some point. It's just bad timing because he's having this amazing career games, and the off the field stuff happens at the same time. It's really too bad. But I alluded to the fact that Zimmer had said that Denver was perhaps Cousins' best game. There's a lot of debate out there about that because people point to the first half of that game. I looked at 3 other games, just looking at statistics and QBR and ratings. There were the 2 Packers games, which I'm not really going to focus on. There was the Lions game this year, 4 touchdowns, 388 yards, and a 87 QBR. The Philly game, which I talked about before, 333 yards, 4 touchdowns, a 93.4 QBR, and the Rams game, which was 422 yards, 3 touchdowns, and an 85 QBR. He fumbled at the end of that game. I think had that final drive where he fumbled ended up as a game-winning drive. That may have been his best game. But I lean to the Broncos game as his best game for a multitude of reasons. You know, he's had this just amazing second quarter on of his season after the Bears game. If you look at his game-by-game stats, I mean, just the gaudy QB ratings, the statistics, the 1 interception versus almost 20 touchdowns. It's everything that people like me, who I keep bragging about this article that I wrote last offseason. That was basically, I'll be the first to say it, they need to go all in on Cousins, talking about with the talent on this team, Cousins could be a top 5 quarterback. Statistically, parentheses, I really struggled as to whether or not to put him as a top 3 guy. Right now, he's the second best quarterback in the league statistically. So I do want to pat myself on the back a little bit for that because I got killed for that at the time, especially throughout the season. I still get messages about that. I can show you on the Purple PTSD Facebook, still like Cousins? And then I wait a little while and I say, yes. I think when you have a question like that, not that it matters really which game is best. It just matters how he's playing right now and how you can look and to apply that going on. Zimmer did say he didn't really care what people thought or what their narrative was in regards to Cousins, so that kind of kills this segment. But he did say, I just want to keep him playing that way. Hey, Jerry Burns. Ooh, Jerry Burns guy. You're an old school fan, man. Thanks for the comment. He's saying to draft Isaiah Simmons out of Clemson, and you'll have solved your safety issues with Curse leaving. Yeah, I mean, yeah. I don't think you obviously mean first round that way because you don't really need to replace Curse that high up. Maybe they go with another corner to replace Rhodes unless they think Hughes is the guy. I wouldn't think any other team would, but I know Zimmer is like, a kid with a shiny new toy every time he sees a corner, especially one that's high on his board that falls to whatever position the Vikings have. At this point, though, I talked about this on Morning Joe's as well. I would say that the biggest position of need for this team is the 3-tech defensive tackle. They need a guy who maybe is what Sharif Floyd was supposed to be, which really sucks because of what happened with him and his surgery and his nerve damage. But a guy that can get pressure on the interior of this defensive line because, again, you have these 2 amazing defensive ends that are both leading the league in pressures, 1 and 2. And it's not translating really into sacks as of late or any sort of impact on the flow of the game, or the secondary, and I put that squarely on the secondary. That's what's nice about having things like PFF and these statistics as analytics kind of takes over the NFL, because from an eye test level, you can only see so much on your TV, and especially if you're like me and you end up watching the final drive of the game from your front yard through the window, which I literally did on Sunday, which is something I probably shouldn't tell people as I analyze these things, but thank God for DVR. But it doesn't seem like they're getting those pressures as much because they cut to the throw. These quarterbacks are getting they're able to step up into the pocket despite the pressure, and then they have a number of options down the field on most plays. Again, 97 QBR down the field, and Zimmer's defense is predicated on a lot of pressure and a lot of organic pressure, a lot of lack of pressure that doesn't come from blitzes. And if you're not having that, that does kind of throw things off a little bit. And I mean, they are having it, but they're not having the interior pressure, so you're not getting cutting off that safety valve that most decent quarterbacks, or even a guy like Brandon Allen, who's played in his second game, figured out. But again, it all falls back to the secondary, and I don't really know how to fix that right now. That concerns me greatly. But when it comes back to Cousins and his best game, I would say the last 2 weeks arguably have been some of his best games. Because it goes against the narrative that Zimmer doesn't care about for obvious reasons, that Cousins is a stat patter, that he doesn't win close games. He doesn't come from behind. He doesn't win primetime games. He doesn't win games against teams with a better than 500 record. I think that context is super important when you look at these things. And to be completely honest, I don't want to sound like a Cousins apologist because, again, I was such a huge Cousins guy. I'm a big Big Ten guy. You can see my Big Ten basketball right there. When the Big Ten had 11 teams. That's right after Penn State joined. I think I got that at Hardee's, which should tell you how old I am. I have a theory that you look at last season, and a lot of people, the anti-Cousins people, or the never Cousinsers, as I've been calling them, don't like to really give him any credit for last season. A lot of people were mad about Case Keenum, which was an extension of being mad about Teddy Bridgewater. Then they get upset about the contract amount. And it's funny when people point to that contract that they never really look back again at that context, which was on Vikings Twitter, on Reddit, when they talked about the potential of bringing Cousins in and how much that would cost. The theory at the time was that you were going to have to lose someone like Danielle Hunter, Anthony Barr, Eric Kendricks, Trey Waynes. It was, which one of those would you be okay with losing to bring Cousins in? At the time, I was like, well, Barr, I guess, because I didn't think Eric Wilson played that bad in his stead when he was injured last season. Now that's something I don't agree with anymore. I think Barr does so much on this defense, and he's been really, really, I guess, underrated or kind of vilified because, in that Rams game, he got beat for 2 touchdowns, but he was covering Cooper Kupp, for God's sakes. I mean, that was just a bad play call, if anything else. And the point of this being that we didn't end up losing any of those guys. And Cousins came in last year. The defense was in disarray. They had to simplify things and get back to just what they were good at. That took about 5 or 6 games. By that point, the offensive line was terrible. They were getting worse. Dalvin Cook was gone, and you had no really semblance of a run game. Everything came down to Cousins. It just wasn't going to work. I think it took a while for them to figure out how to best utilize Cousins with the talent around him. It didn't help also that DeFilippo and Zimmer couldn't agree on anything, and then DeFilippo gets fired. You bring in Stefanski. It's just a wasted season on multiple levels. I think things may have been different had they invested in some interior offensive linemen in that draft. I mean, between Hughes, who I'm glad they have now, but if you look at between Hughes and Brian O'Neill, there were 4 interior offensive linemen that were taken that were all day one starters. A lot of them won different awards last season. That would have been nice to have. I mean, losing, I don't think a lot of people knew. The team maybe knew, but losing Easton for the entire season was bad. But they knew Berger was leaving, and they knew what a hole that was going to be. You move Remmers over there. Remmers didn't really have any experience playing guard. It was just, that's not why we paid him. That's not why we gave him that free agency money. Brian O'Neill ended up being spectacular, but it just wasn't. It didn't make sense to do it that way when you invest the most money ever in any contract of all time in the NFL, and then you don't really protect him, even though you have these glaring issues, which goes back again to what I said about Zimmer and the shiny new toy and the corner. I mean, I like Hughes. I think he's been okay. I don't know what to it's hard to really analyze him. For the reasons I stated before. But it's just, it was hard to really objectively say Cousins sucks because of last year. Last year was just a mess on on offense and on defense at parts. So, it took a few weeks this season. You get Kubiak in, you're implementing new stuff. And I think they found what works best, and they're still finding that, and they're still implementing more and more what Kubiak's been doing. I mean, there's an article also on Bleacher Report that goes to Score North that talks about the amounts of 11, 12, 22, and 13 personnel that the defense or the offense has been running, increasingly so. And so the 11 personnel is the 3 wide receiver formation that most teams run increasingly. The Vikings run that 22% of the time. That's the lowest in the NFL. Between the 12, 22, and 13, 12 being 1 running back, 2 tight ends, 22 being 2 running backs, 2 tight ends, and 13 being 1 running back, 3 tight ends, they run those 50% of the time collectively. They're either the most in the league or the second most in regards to the 22. That's Kubiak. And I think we're seeing, Rudolph has 5 touchdowns, I believe, in 5 games, 3 in the last 2. Irv Smith Jr. has been getting better and better. He's as a number 2 tight end, as a rookie. If he over the last few games, if you were to extrapolate that over 16 games, he would have 59 receptions for 525 yards. Kirk Cousins also has 111.1, so 4 ones, rating throwing to him. That's reminiscent of Gronk and Hernandez in New England, and that's the comparison that a lot of people are making after they made that pick. I've heard a lot of people, Troy Aikman being one of them, saying that Irv Smith Jr. is going to be this amazing player, and it's really exciting to see him get more and more action, stepping in and filling the void that Thielen left. And with Thielen coming back, which Mark Rosen tweeted, without hesitation, Cousins said Thielen will be back for Seattle. That is really exciting, and that goes back to what I was saying about the power rankings, and I used to love those. Tuesday was my favorite day of the week when the Vikings won, for that reason. And I know they don't really mean anything. I think they kind of do. There's people like Joe Oberly who hates those, so we never talk about those on Morning Joes, and I love Joe, and so I can always hear him in the back of my mind, like a little angel on my shoulder telling me what to say or what not to say. And so I do think they matter in that these guys that do these things, they obviously are looking at what team is hot, what team is playing well, what team isn't. I think the Vikings winning 6 of 7 games, the way that they've been winning them, not so much with the defense but with the offense. The defense maybe holds them back, but they should also tell the league that, man, and if they're doing this well on offense without Thielen, and the defense still is kind of figuring things out in the secondary, they should be getting a lot more credit than they are, I think, or at least teams should be a lot more afraid of them than they are. I saw in one of the power rankings today that the Vikings wouldn't get past the second round of the playoffs. They're not a real team. They're a fraud. They were really just talking about the Broncos game and going down 20 points in the first half and saying, you can't do that against Seattle. You can't do that against this or that. And that's very much true. I mean, if you watch my halftime show from Sunday, I was pissed. I said championship teams don't do that. I'm not happy it happened, but I almost think it was a positive down the road because it showed this team that Cousins can win these games, that they can beat elite pass defending defenses like the Broncos, who were 4th in the NFL in regards to their pass defense, through the air. It doesn't all need to go through Cook. Now, I think that 2 of the 3 touchdowns that Cousins had were off of play actions or play action rollouts or like a delayed play action draw play, and those don't work unless the team you're playing against respects your running back. And obviously teams respect the hell out of what Dalvin Cook is doing. He's the best back in the NFL this year. All due respect to Christian McCaffrey. So I'm not saying that he did it all by himself, but a lot of those narratives that Zimmer was saying he didn't care about were kind of killed these last 2 weeks again, and seeing Cousins come out and this offense score a touchdown on every possession in the second half. To come back against this kind of defense is amazing. Because what did you hear during the post-Bears stretch? They're not playing anybody. They're beating up on bad teams. This is what Cousins does. Wait till they play this team. Wait till prime time. Wait till that. The way the season has worked out is been really beneficial, because I do think that they've had the ability to gain their confidence back, Cousins and the team, against some lesser opponents. And now they've built towards the Cowboys in Dallas. A lot of people said they couldn't win on the road, or again, a primetime good team. Then you play an elite pass defense like the Broncos. You beat them a way that you haven't been winning during that stretch. Then you go into the bye week, you try to get some of your guys healthy, and then you go into Seattle, which is between the Seattle and Minnesota are the two hottest teams in the NFC right now, at least in regards to win streaks. So, yeah, I mean, it's exciting. I mean, I know a lot of us are just really worried about the secondary, and I think that's what's going to end up being, ironically, what determines how far this team goes. I'm still not completely comfortable with some of the coaching decisions they've made. The first half of the Broncos game, why they weren't rolling Cousins out more, especially with Von Miller being on the other side of the ball. He's not having a typical Von Miller season, but he's still freaking Von Miller. I know that you gotta try to outthink and outscheme the opposing team, but at some point you're just gonna have to go heads up and say, this is what we're good at, and you gotta try to stop us, not get too cute. If I could make a mug right now for the show or a shirt, I would say, don't get too cute. Because every time you hear that from a Vikings coach, it's in response to a game that went really badly. We got too cute. The Eagles game, the Chiefs game. If they would have just run Cook the way that he'd been running up until that point, instead of trying to do something different against the 30th ranked rush defense, that game shouldn't even have been close. And so that's frustrating. So I still worry about the coaches, especially in big games or playoff games or against elite offensive-minded coaches, where I think Zimmer outthinks himself because he's like, oh my God, I gotta, play fifth dimensional chess against this guy because he's going to beat my scheme. You know what? We're player by player on this roster. There's no team that's more talented than this Vikings team. Play them straight up. Play what has worked and see where it leaves you. I'd rather lose that way than lose trying to do things that we hadn't done all season. I mean, I will never forget that Eagles game, one of the 100 deep passes where their receivers were wide open down the field. You saw Harrison Smith just go like, what am I doing? Like, what is this? And so, yeah, I'm a little worried about that. But again, the irony is that it's the secondary. It's what Zimmer does. It's arguably why he got this job. At the time, especially, you had Rodgers and Stafford, and to a lesser extent, I think Jay Cutler. You had these great receivers, and you had to bring in a guy who was defensive minded and who also was going to be able to take advantage of Xavier Rhodes and Harrison Smith, and put together a plan to stop these elite NFC North quarterbacks. And that's why they brought Trey Waynes in, because of his speed and size. And so it just would be so strange if that was the reason they ended up losing, was because of what Zimmer is his main thing. It'd be like Childress losing because he wasn't a dick, I guess. I don't know what his main thing was outside of being a dick. So yeah, this has been the first episode of Purple Update Live. I hope you guys liked it. I hope you share it with your friends. I hope you tell me what having friends is like. I hope to be part of an inside joke someday, office quote, and I will be back tomorrow. If you could subscribe to us on Periscope, follow us on Twitter, Facebook, or YouTube, that would be extremely helpful. Hopefully I'll have some of our friends from Vikings territory and Purple PTSD on at some point this week. Guys like Chad Greenway or Nick Swartzen. The episode that I launched a week ago, I had Brandon Lang on, who was from the movie Two for the Money. That was about his life. He talked a lot about betting, but more so about his view of the Vikings as a guy who looks at football from that angle. I'll post that episode in the article for this show as well. But I will be back tomorrow, which is Wednesday, around 1:30 or 2. I'll figure out the best time to do this every single day. Because it kind of depends on when press releases come out and news and all that stuff. But I'm really looking forward to doing this show every day, and hopefully it'll turn into something fun. And the more that I'm here, the more I do want to welcome you guys to ask questions or comments or participate in the process as well, because that's why I'm doing this live, right? Outside of the fact that I don't want to edit things or buy any more software. I have too much. But yeah, this has been the first episode of Purple Update Live. Skull. See you guys tomorrow.